And let me just, there's a couple waiting in the waiting room. Let me admit them and let them kind of get in and settled here. And welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corners. May is for Mystery. Our next guest is Kate Flora. Before I get going though, a really quick thing. Everybody in the Zoom chat or Zoom uh, part of it is if you keep your mics muted and your videos off, it just keeps down disruptions. And if you have a question or comment for Kate, you can feel free to put it in the chat box and I will go ahead and relay it to her unless she happens to catch it herself. Everybody over here on Facebook Live, we're over there as well. You should use the comment box over there and I will have to relay the question or comment to Kate. So as I said, we have Kate Flora. She is where's my thing? She's a Maine mystery writer. After a career in law in the Maine Attorney General's office, protecting battered kids, chasing deadbeat dads, and representing the Human Rights Commission, along with private practice, she became the author of 19 books and more than 20 short stories. Kate is the author of the Thea Kozak series, the Joe Burgess series, and nonfiction true crime books focusing on aspects of the public safety officer's experience. She is also the winner of the Public Safety Works Writers Association, Public Safety Writers Association Award for Nonfiction, and she's a two-time winner of the Maine Literary Award for Crime Fiction. Kate, welcome to our May is for Mystery Writers series.
Well, thank you. Of course, Chris, for me, every day is, and every month and every year is Mystery Writers Year, but it's nice to have a month to celebrate what we're doing here.
It is. This is the third series that I've done. I did one in February. It was called Pharaoh Feb for Fantasy Romance February, obviously, because Valentine's Day is in there. And I did one way back in just before Christmas called A Frightmare Before Christmas. We have a couple books on Krampus, and so we thought that would be kind of good to kind of go along with that Nightmare Before Christmas movie there. So let's get right into this with the first question, or actually kind of first statement. You grew up on a chicken farm.
I did. And you're not supposed to laugh, and
No, I'm not laughing.
It's my country cred, I mean,
right.
I really did grow up on a chicken farm, and I even had a hospital for the wounded chickens, because chickens are very mean. Pecking order comes because of the way that they behave. They do mistreat each other, and so I had the hospital for the injured chickens and nursed them back to health. But I did not aspire to be a nurse or a farmer.
No, but you did aspire to be to be a writer. With you in your bio, it says you dreamed about being able to create the kinds of compelling, enchanting worlds of the books you disappeared into every week. So what types of books did you like to read?
Well, I mean, I read everything. I read all the books that we all read as kids. And then I read all those series, Trixie Belden, and I can't remember the nurse. Cherry Ames was the nurse, and Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and all those series. So I suppose from all that, I was primed to write a series. And then when I was about 11 and a half, I got my dream job as the librarian's assistant. The library was open one afternoon a week. And I checked out the books and shelved the books at the tiny Vos Library in Union, Maine, so that I got second dibs after the librarian on those romantic suspense books by Mary Stewart and Victoria Holt and Phyllis Whitney. So, there was a lot of that. And then, but basically, it was sort of like I read everything.
Mostly. So is that how you got the inspiration for wanting to become a mystery writer? All the mysteries that
no, I actually wanted to write historical when I was young. I wanted to write about the sea captain's wife, and I tried it once and I was incredibly bad at it. I didn't even finish. So no, I think that the mystery writing actually came from being in the Attorney General's office. It was being a lawyer, practicing law, and the kind of law that I was doing put me in contact with an awful lot of people who behaved badly. And I became deeply curious about what it was in people's natures, in their upbringing, that led them to decide that it was okay for them to sort of opt out of the social contract that we had all kind of signed on to, which is that you don't steal, you don't hurt other people, and of course you don't commit the ultimate crime, which is to take someone's life. So that sort of, that curiosity about the people who were on the other side of the cases, who were the subjects of the cases, really led me to wonder about people. And I didn't know until I started writing how important psychology was in terms of doing crime writing. You really have to understand, what makes people tick. You have to wonder about that. And of course, wondering is the big thing that we all do. What's that about?
Right. So your books are based on your experiences through. So were you an attorney, or were
I
you
was an attorney.
what an attorney in Maine, in Boston?
In Maine and in Boston, but in Maine, I was, as the wee bio says, I represented the Human Rights Commission, which was all kinds of employment discrimination. I represented, I was in the Department of Human Services, so that was battered kids and deadbeat dads. And that there's an awful lot of material there about humans and character and bad acts.
Tell us about some of the nonfiction books that you won the award for, and talk a little bit about the award.
Well, I was hoping that I'd have them here on the desk with me, but they don't turn out to be here. It's a very long story, Chris. I was writing my Thea Kozak series, and the Thea Kozak series was what we call strong female amateur PI. That's the elevator line. That it's the Nancy Drew comes of age. We all wanted to write women who rescued themselves, and after I'd written about 6 books in that series, the publisher dropped the series very suddenly. And I didn't quite know what to do. So I'm debating, what direction to go in next. And I realized that I had just spent, even though it's an amateur character, her significant other is a Maine state trooper. And because crimes necessarily always involve the police and police procedure and crime scene issues, I was always running in and out of my local police department and other police departments asking, my police chief would sort of sigh and say, "What do you want to know today, Kate?" And I would say, "I want to know this or I want to know that." And he'd answer my questions. And so I decided I would write a series with cops. And so I went from writing strong women, which, having gone to law school when I did, I knew something about, to writing middle-aged male cops, which I didn't know anything about at all, except for these, driving my police chief crazy. So I decided that I needed to know I'd set it in Portland, Maine. So I decided I needed to know how the Portland Police Department worked. And I got myself a pen pal. And then I went to the department and he showed me around and he introduced me to people. And one of the people he introduced me to was the detective, the lieutenant who was in charge of their criminal investigations division. And he came bouncing out of his office and shook my hand and said, "You're a writer I've always wanted to write." And I said, "Aha, I have got my go-to guy." And he became the person who answered questions. He didn't blink when I would call up and say, "I need to know how to cook methamphetamine." It was that kind of relationship. And then a real murder happened on his watch and he was in charge of, the investigation. And from almost day one, he said to me, "I want to write about this. Things are happening in this case that have never happened in any other case. And the way that we are attached to the victim, even though we're, taught never to get attached to our victims, and the way that this case is unfolding." And it was a joint Maine State Police and Portland Police investigation because there was no body. And so no one knew where the crime had taken place. So for a year, he said, "I want to write about this." And his writing teacher would say, when something significant happens, take a few minutes, take a whole bunch of notes, put them in a folder. And when, things calm down, then you can write this book. And things calmed down. And he's still saying, "Someday I want to write about this." And one day I got sick of listening to it and called him up and I said, "You're never going to write this book, Joe. What if we wrote this book together?" Which was a huge step because writers, tend to be extremely solitary people.
Uh-huh.
And crime, true crime writing is a completely different thing. So I was offering a collaboration, which I knew didn't suit my nature, and to write a kind of book that I didn't know how to write and I didn't read. But we went through no and then maybe, and then yes. And that turned out to be, like a 2 or 3 year project while we saw it through the trial and through the appeals and the conviction, and wrote the book. And I spent a lot of that time, in the breathalyzer room at the Portland Police Department, surrounded by stacks of files as I, learned what the case was about and who the players were. And then I had to go talk to cops, which really is kind of scary. And in the end, we wrote a very important book, I think. It's called Finding Amy, a true story of murder in Maine. And it's the story, it's a story that kind of gave back to Amy, who was murdered when she was 25, sort of a posterity. It really showed who she was and what the world had lost. But also, we live in a time when police are not regarded very well. And this really showed the police at their absolute best, the way that they were so determined to get justice for this victim. And it also shows you all the stuff you don't see on the news, which is sort of looking over the officer's shoulders, step by step, all the way through the investigation, through the moment when the jury comes back with their verdict. So it was absolutely fascinating to be, it was a privilege to work on that book.
Right. So you also wrote another nonfiction book, A Good Man with a Dog, a game warden's 25 years in the Maine woods, and that explores policing in the great outdoors. What was that like, working with a game warden?
Oh, there's so many funny stories from that book, Chris. But the way that one came about is that after I did Finding Amy, we had a launch party, and the game warden who organized the search that ultimately found her body says to me with a grin, "So Kate, when you're ready, I've got another one for you," which turned out to be another missing body, another police case up in Miramichi, New Brunswick. And the warden who had the 25-year, who's the subject of A Good Man with a Dog, who is the good man, was on both of those searches with his trained cadaver dogs. And so he was retiring from the Maine Warden Service, and he called me up. We'd never met. And he said, I'm about to retire. I've read your work, and I like the way that you tell the story, you present us. People have told me all my life that I'm a great storyteller and I should write a book, but I don't know how to write a book. So, can we talk? And, so we sat down and we talked for a few hours, and it seemed clear to me that he, was a wonderful storyteller. So I did the same thing I did sort of with Joe. I gave him my best writerly advice, which was, it's hard to sit down and type. So talking is easier for you. You're a great storyteller. So get one of those handheld tape recorders, keep it in your truck. And every time something sort of stirs a memory, or anytime, you come to a spot where something happened that you think you'd like to write about, just take the recorder and talk into it. And you can always get it transcribed, and that will give you the material to do the book. So months go by, and I talk to Roger and I say, "What's happening?" And he says, "Haven't even taken it out of the box." He says, in my world, when the tape recorder comes out and goes down on the table, it means there's a bad guy sitting across from me and I can't just talk to it. So I said, "Okay, I'll come up." So I don't know if we're still alive, Chris, but I'm just going to keep on talking.
Yeah, I'm serious. Like I said, if my microphone goes off, if you see that turn off, and then so this stupid thing keeps going. The video part is what's happening. So yeah, please keep going.
So I drive up to Guilford, Maine, which is pretty far from here and pretty far from everywhere. And Roger and I get in the truck. He takes the recorder out of the box, and the batteries have died. It's been sitting there so long. So we put new batteries in the recorder. I get in the front. His wife gets in the back with a shotgun, and off we go. And it is literally the first time I've worked on a book where someone was sitting behind me with a gun. But, anyway, so I hold the recorder, we drive all around, Roger talks, she corrects him from the back seat, and every once in a while we stop and she shoots something. And it was, this was my introduction to the world of the great outdoors. Not that I didn't grow up, outdoors, but not like that. And so, basically it was a lot of hours in the truck, listening to Roger talk and holding the tape recorder and transcribing it, and then looking at the different stories he was telling and trying to figure out how to organize that material to tell a story. And what became clear when we started out, he and I think both thought that what we were working on was what I would call cute animal stories. You know, the poachers, the bad guys, the fishermen who have an over limit of fish stuffed under their car seats, all the really fun stories that he had to tell. But it turned out that it was also a story about 25 years policing a population where everyone carried guns. You were usually alone. And that his work had not only involved, you know, fish and game protection, but it had also involved search and rescue, because the Warden Service has the responsibility for search and rescue in Maine, and training dogs to help with search and rescue, and then training dogs to find cadavers, because if the person was dead, the dog wouldn't necessarily tell you what they'd found. And from there to working with law enforcement and public safety on crime case, homicide cases, missing body cases. And also on the impact that that job had on somebody day after day, year after year. And in the end, he went to New Orleans after Katrina with the dogs, you know, finding body parts and people, and came back and developed a massive case of PTSD. And it's always amazed me in a way that he was willing to talk to me about that he was willing to share that. But it has turned out that that is a part of the book which has been extremely valuable to other people, about, you know, how you treat PTSD, how you come back from it, and how it changes you and changes your life. So it was quite again an amazing book to get to work on. And I never imagined being trusted that much to tell that kind of a story. And it was, well, I keep saying amazing, but it was amazing.
There's another officer or detective up in Bangor. I don't know if you know him, Tim Cotton. He wrote a very humorous book called Detective in the Dooryard.
He's such a sweetheart. He really is.
Have you met him? Have you worked with him, or you just
only that, you know, I read the book and he's read my books, and we chat back and forth sometimes. And, you know, we all read about I have my Duck of Justice t-shirt, you know.
So when you were talking about the first nonfiction that you wrote with Joe, before you mentioned his name, I was actually thinking that it was another detective lieutenant that was, or sergeant, detective sergeant, that was in the Portsmouth Police Department, who we had on here a couple days ago, that could not stop praising you and your help with him in writing his book. Of course, we're talking about Bruce Coffin.
Right. Yeah. Bruce is my protege, you know.
Yes.
He actually is. I'm, you know, immensely proud of him. I think he's a wonderful writer. He's just a great guy. And it's so nice to have a friend like Bruce, because I tend to send out into the world these, you know, author needs help emails, because I was never an officer. And usually the subject line is help or author needs help. And then I will ask a question and Bruce will always come back with an answer. And so will Joe. And sometimes I ask Roger about, you know, human relations. I've got this, you know, this one bunch of wonderful people out there in the world who help me, and just like I help them. So it's I mean, the mystery writing field is just full of the best people.
It is, and I found one of the best places to meet a lot of those people is the New England Crime Bake, which has come up pretty much in every conversation. So might as well bring it up this time. And you were actually one of the founding members of the New England Crime Bake.
It was born in my living room when we were having, I think it was a Sisters in Crime meeting, and I said, you know, I think we here in New England have enough writers, enough interest. We need our own conference. And the president of Sisters in Crime, our local chapter, was there. The president of Mystery Writers of America, our local chapter, was there. And the two of them basically stood up and said, we'll do it. And we did it. And now we've been doing it for, I don't know, almost 20 years. And it's a fabulous conference, because just like our community is friendly, it's small and friendly. It's not intimidating. And we all know that aspiring writers or new writers are so timid, you know, it's hard for them to even say they're writers or that they hope to be published one day. And this is a place where everyone has been where they are and everybody wants them to succeed. So it's really lovely.
Must have been difficult last year not being able to have it.
Yeah, and they still don't know what they're doing this fall. I hope they're going to just have it. I think that, I mean, the coming up, in a couple of weeks, I think it's March 5th. I mean, June 5th, but I'm not quite sure, is the Maine Crime Wave, which is another one of those small
Mm.
local conferences where I said, we need a conference. And I'm retired now. I no longer say we need anything, but it's also it's a great way to bring the community together. And since writers are so solitary, it's wonderful to have an opportunity to talk writing. It's the only people you actually associate with who understand that if you have voices in your head, it's okay.
That's a good way to put it. So you were also the international president of Sisters in Crime, and I love Sisters in Crime. We've done well since we opened. We're almost 3 years, but it was in August, so actually 2 years, 2 summers now. We've done the first one we did in person panels with them. Mystery making was a really good
Yeah,
one
that's fun.
last year, and then last summer we did 3 virtual ones, and they're fantastic. Leslie Wheeler and Maureen Milliken and Sharon Yang.
Yeah.
They're coming up pretty soon. We had Leslie at the beginning, but um, it's a great organization, and so you were president of the international
Yeah,
version
that
of that.
means that I'm now a goddess. It's very nice. Once you served as president of Sisters in Crime, the national or international, then you become a goddess, which is really kind of cool.
You also taught writing and done manuscript critiques for Grub Street in Boston. What's Grub
Right.
Street in Boston?
Grub Street is probably the largest non-university writing program in the country. It's it does online classes until, this last year. It did tons and tons of in-person classes. It has incubators for poets, incubators for nonfiction writers, incubators for fiction writers, which are year-long programs. It has all kinds of programs about craft, screenwriting, essay, short story, whatever it is. And I, of course, I used to teach, I haven't done it for a while, but I used to teach a class which was sort of aimed at healing the wounds that bad writing instructors have inflicted on people. And it was called I've Always Wanted to Write But, where we talk about where you write and honoring your desire to write, as well as doing, a lesson every week, and having a lecture, but also an awful lot of sort of when do you write and what gets in the way of your writing, questions like that. And so often people came in having wanted to write, but they'd been told, as Bruce Kaufman was by his college writing teacher, you're no good, don't bother. Or, to be someone so critical that they did enough damage to send people away from the writing process. So I like to stick the Band-Aids on, and then I give give my students a sign, because it's hard to make time for writing. And the sign says, "Not now, I'm writing." And I give it to them and I tell them that they will know whether it needs to go on the outside of their door to their writing space to keep people out, or on the inside of their door to keep them in.
Well, we'll definitely get into your writing process and your habits and everything in a little while. But so you are the author of 19 books and more than
Actually,
20.
it's 23. I'm
20.
sorry. I can't keep up with these
Okay.
bios.
Yeah, yep. But you are a 5-time finalist, or maybe more now. You twice won the Maine Literary Award for crime fiction. What's crime fiction? Well, actually, here's something I wanted to ask, because you had mentioned that the main character in one of your series is an amateur, or not even a in law enforcement of any kind, but always referred to. But her, I think you said her husband or something was the policeman. Would this be kind of a quasi cozy, or how does that differ from?
I do not write cozy.
You
I'm
don't.
sorry. Yeah,
No,
it's,
no.
it's one of those funny things. I'd love to write a cozy. They have such a following, and the books are so sweet, and they don't take too long to write because they're kind of short. And I might have to learn to bake dog biscuits or run a cupcake shop or something really fun like that. But in fact, it's something in my very sweet nature seems to be drawn to the dark side. So I guess what I would call them is traditional. The traditional ones are, they're an amateur detective, but that challenges you, of course, to give your detective a reason to be involved in all of these cases. So, and when I tell people what my character does, their eyes glaze over. She's a consultant to independent schools, which means private schools. And I gave her that job because I figured if I made my character a lawyer, I would constantly be trying to figure out what's new, what's going on, because I'm not practicing law. How will I find out? So, but my next door neighbor is a consultant to independent schools. So I just go to her and say, what's new in the world of, private schools? What's happening on campuses? What are the scandals? And she'll tell me a bunch of stories, and I go home and, write a book. So sometimes the problems involve Thea's family in some way, and sometimes they involve her work in some way. And sometimes there's a cross between those two. And sometimes it's completely random, like the book that just came out, Death Comes Knocking. She and her husband have bought a house and are fixing up the house before the baby comes. And this woman who's also pregnant knocks on the door, and she thinks, oh, good, I've got a neighbor. We'll have our babies together, blah, blah, blah. And then the woman disappears. And of course, Thea's made a connection. So she's got to go and figure out what's going on in this woman's life and why there are other people who appear to be government agents looking for her and what's really going on. But, when we talk about crime fiction, we talk about a genre that has, subgenres all over the place. I mean, these days, it also probably includes suspense and thrillers. It includes probably in some ways crime fiction, but nonfiction as well, if it's a crime novel. So there's an awful lot of, space. And when we talk about the big tent, we often sort of do a panel where we'll talk about, well, I'm in this corner of the big tent. I write police procedurals, and someone else is in a different corner of the tent and they write domestic suspense, and somebody else writes cozies, and somebody else, writes some, so or they write thrillers. So there's, there's no one thing that any one of us, and that defines crime fiction.
Who are some of your biggest influences as far as other writers for your work? And you take a lot from your time in law enforcement, your time talking to other officers, like you said, talking to other people to get ideas. But who are some of your greatest influences?
Well, it's an interesting question, of course, because for years and years, in order to avoid copying anyone's voice, I had a rule that I didn't read mysteries. I didn't read crime fiction when I was writing a book. And now it's sort of the point that where I'm always writing a book. So of course I have to read, because I read people's manuscripts for critiques. I read people for quotes. But when I started out, I gave Thea godparents, fictional godparents, and her godparents were Dick Francis and Sarah Paretsky. And they were the two who sort of where I was aiming for in terms of the kind of character that I wanted to create. And for a long time, people would say, well, if you could write like anybody, who would you want to write like? And I would say, I want to write like the best Kate Flora I can, because I'm still finding my feet. Now, every once in a while, I'll read some book. I mean, who would not want to write like James Lee Burke, right?
Right.
He's a poet. But I like hard-boiled guys. I like Robert Crace's books, not because I like Elvis Cole, but because I love Joe Pike. I love that sort of, strong, silent guy. I love Laura Lippman. I think she's wonderful. I have always thought that Elizabeth, oh dear, I'm going to have one of those senior moments, and I'm entitled. Inspector Lindley, Elizabeth George. I think Elizabeth George is just a brilliant plotter. You just never know what she's going to do. I get annoyed with her characters, but I think that she's just really, really good at what she does. And I think Jerry Boyle, another Maine writer, has one of the most brilliant abilities to create suspense out of almost nothing. A creak, a tree, a look, a sense of heaviness in the weather. He's just so good at that.
So so you were talking about the Thea Kozak series. The first book was
Chosen for
Chosen
Death.
for Death.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
It's
6,
10.
7, and Death Comes Knocking is the latest one. That one just came out. Was it last month or was it a couple
No,
days
that's
ago?
in the fall. The new Burgess came out on April 20th,
That's what it is.
which
Okay.
is A World of Deceit. So, yeah.
Do you write, well, your other series is the Joe Burgess series, and there's just about as many books in that series as well. How do you write your series? Do you do one book from one, then one book from another? Do you do a couple or three in one series and then go over to the other one, or do you start something fresh just to kind of keep things fresh? And then how do you keep them separate?
Well, they're so different, I mean, well, that's a very complicated question. So I'll try. I work on one book at a time. That's always been my way. So I work on a Thea, and then I send that to the publisher, and I go and work on a Joe. Every once in a while, there'll be a space in which I just feel like doing something else. So for the last 2 years, in addition to the Theas and the Joe, I have written 2 books that are still living in the drawer, uh, both police procedurals, but one with a strong male character and one with a strong female character, that are just waiting for me to decide what to do with them. Um, and then every once in a while, I do something crazy. Like a year ago, I published a book that what I call the books in the drawer. The books that I just write when I have some time to write something different, just to keep me sort of challenged and fresh. And that it was a romantic suspense called Wedding Bell Ruse, Ruse. Not my favorite title, but the publishers choose what they choose. And that, it's very different. One of the ways that I don't get Thea and Joe mixed up, or is that Thea is first person and Joe is third person.
Mm.
And they each have such strong voices. I mean, they're just so who they are. And if I, am away from Thea for a while and think, well, I guess I'm done with that. I don't think I'll write any more of those. I'll start to miss her, and I'll type chapter 1, and she'll just start talking, and she's so who she is that it's very clear where we're going and what's going to happen and what she's about. And the same thing with Joe.
So tell us, you told us a little bit about Kate, or Thea rather. Tell us about it. Tell us about the whole series, who she is, and a little bit more about the series itself.
Well, she did, as I say, come out of what I call the Nancy Drew tradition. She is a strong, independent woman who wants to rescue herself. And a lot of us, I think, wrote books like that, where we had, a Kinsey Milhone, Sue Grafton's character, or Sarah Paretsky's character, V.I. Wachowski, or some of Laura Lippman's early, Baltimore, Tess Monahan. There's a whole bunch of us who wrote women who rescue themselves, who are independently problem solvers and crime solvers. And so she sort of presented herself because in Chosen for Death, her adopted younger sister is found dead. And the family just sort of wants to pull it, sort of close their eyes, turn away. The cops don't have a suspect. And Thea, and that family just sort of wants to say, leave it alone. And Thea says, nobody kills my little sister, and gets away with it. And so she, goes and sticks her nose in where it's not wanted, and ultimately figures out what happened, almost losing her own life in the process. But I had meant that to be a standalone, just one book. And I gave it to some beta readers, and they read the book and came back to me and said, but we love her. You have to write her into another book. And so she just became, the heroine for this series. And, she has issues with her mother. She has a little bit of I want my father to notice me and love me, and he doesn't always do that. She's got, she describes herself as Thea, the human tow truck. That is, she sees people broken down on the highway of life, and she has to stop and help. And that's who she is. She's a fixer. She's a rescuer. And she's a bit of a feminist. She has a bit of a chip on her shoulder. And she works too hard. She's a workaholic. So in the first book, she meets Andre, the Maine state trooper who's investigating her sister's murder, and they hate each other, which is a great beginning for a relationship. And over the course of the books, they, work out their relationship. And it's a real challenge because she's a I can take care of myself kind of person who's a bit headstrong and gets into dangerous situations where I, her mother, the writer, keeps saying, oh no, dear Thea, please be careful, don't go in there. And Andre is a serve and protect guy who wants to protect her. And it's a really interesting evolution how they work out a relationship where he can sort of let her be and she can sort of let herself be taken care of. And everybody loves Andre. If
So
you write your imaginary detective, you get to make him a real hunk. And I say, the nice thing about being the writer is you control the vertical and the horizontal.
right,
Yeah.
right. So with so many books in the series and with this relationship between those two, and typically, I like to see anyways, even if it's just a single character that goes through each book, main character that goes through each book in the series, you see their growth, either hopefully forward, but sometimes, it slips back, but then, kind of back and forth, especially over a long period of time. Are these able to be read standalone, or do you really need to start with book one so you
Um,
can see that relationship develop or not?
That's a hard question because you as a bookseller and I as a writer know that there are people who are perfectly happy to pick up book 9 because each of them is a standalone story, love the story, love the character, and go back to one and read their way through. There are other people who are purists and they really only want to start with book 1. But there are two different
Right.
arcs going on. There's the character arc, which goes over the whole series. That's your characters developing, getting setbacks, their relationships with other people, their growth. And then there's the arc of the story, what they've learned, how they solve that particular crime. So, I think that if I've done my job well, a reader should be able to read the book without, needing to have read the others. And I know that it's a problem because I just picked up a book, that was like well into a series that I hadn't read before. And the writer assumed so much about what we should already know about their characters. And I found it really annoying because I hadn't read them. And and it's a delicate balance, that backstory drop, how you weave it in a way that gives the reader enough information without giving away what happened in the other books. And,
Right.
it's another one of the things that are our job, which we try to do well.
So with your Joe Burgess series, let's go ahead. Like I said, there's a lot of in that series too. I believe Playing God is the first one. What's the latest one in that one?
The latest one in that is called A World of Deceit, in which, I mean, in over the arc of that, I started with Joe Burgess as sort of a monkish guy. He's middle-aged, he's solitary, his work is his life. He's relatively happy with that. And he's avoided having entanglements, relationships, even though he'd like to, because his father was a violent drunk. And he's always feared that in relationships, he would, that his father, it would come out in him and he'd be a bad partner. So he's kind of avoided that. And in the first book, in Playing God, he meets a woman who's a nurse. He meets her in the hospital when he's been hit over the head or something. And they're just tremendously attracted to each other. And the thing that makes it work is that she's very independent. She sort of says, I can take care of myself, but I kind of like taking care of you. So, and they evolve. And then, of course, she wants children. She can't have children. And there are two children who come up who, are part of a plot in one of the books who end up, with no parents and in social services care, in foster care, and she wants to adopt them. And he's thinking, I have enough trouble, sort of allowing a woman in my life. And now the woman in my life wants to allow two children into my life. And that, there's a lot of conflict and back and forth, but he sort of loves having a family. And then he discovers, I think it's And Grant You Peace, which was supposed to be the end of the series. It was supposed to be a quartet. and grant you peace was the end. And there are bad guys who are stalking his family. And he suddenly finds himself sort of understanding what other cops go through and feeling incredibly torn because his loyalty is to the cops and the case that he's trying to solve. And then his loyalty is to protecting his family and keeping them safe. And when those two cross, that becomes a really big deal for him. And it's an incredible tension in the book. And that the bad guy stalking his family actually came out of the second true crime that I wrote, which was called Death Dealer, in which the cops that I was dealing with up in Canada, the bad guy that they had identified but couldn't, yet prosecute because they didn't have a body and there were no witnesses to the crime. So they're just putting it together bit by bit by bit. The bad guy says, if you don't back off, I'm coming after your family. So I had never even thought of that. I think we always felt like they were safe and that those barriers are no longer there, that cops are not as safe as they once were. And so I gave that kind of tension to Joe. And then, so that's evolved. So in the newest book, A World of Deceit, he's just come off an absolutely horrific case, a book that was called A Child Shall Lead Them. And he just, he's thinking about retirement. He's run down, he's exhausted. He can't pull himself together to face another case like that. He keeps saying to his bosses, no more kids, just please don't ever give me another case with kids. I can't do it. And so they go on vacation. He's going to take 2 whole weeks. He's going to lie in the hammock. He's going to rest. They're going to have a real vacation. So Chris, his partner, takes the kids paddle boating or off to do something. And he's lying in the hammock. And a little girl taps him on the shoulder and says, excuse me, sir, do you have a phone? I can't wake my father up. And so much for his vacation, So I'm very mean to my characters.
So a lot of the plots for your stories, did they come from some of your cases?
Not usually. Sometimes mostly it's bits and pieces. Someone will tell you something and someone else will tell you something. And gradually, a bunch of things come together and you sort of carry it around in your head and cook it for a while. And then one day you see that you can use this bit and that bit and the other, but it's really made up. It's really, because I don't think it's fair to take from real life. Although I'm sure Brian up in Canada doesn't mind that I had, was influenced. The word we use is influenced.
Influenced.
Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Because
you guys, those shows like Hill Street Blues, Law and Order, ripped from the headlines type of thing. That's not yours are all, like you said, influenced by, but bits and pieces into an original original thing. So when you write the backstory for your characters, do you have a separate book that kind of shows that backstory, or do you do it sort of as you go along?
I'm very bad. I know that you're supposed to have character diaries and you're supposed to do all this stuff. And I would be the first to tell someone else to do it. Give your character a birthday. Write down the essential details of your main characters in your first book so that you don't change their eye color or their mother's first name in the next book. But I've never done it. And now I'm at the point where, we're looking at 17 books here. I sort of say, oh my God, do I go back and start that now? Or do I just sort of pull the old manuscript on the screen and do a search? Because when I was working on this new book, I said, I don't know what Terry Kyle's daughters' names are. Burgess has a team. It's Burgess and Terry Kyle, who's his best friend, and then Stan Perry, who's the young kid who's always, wandering off and getting into trouble and womanizing and so, we have a beautiful sunset going on out here. And so I had to go back and look and realize that I hadn't named them. I had talked about the girls and they had characteristics. And then I think one finally got named, but for this new book, I literally had to say, okay, Burgess has 2 sisters. What are his sisters' kids' names? I know one, but not the other. What is the other sister's husband's name? What is his sister Sandy's husband's name? Because he appears, but he's never been named. It's really interesting. And of course, if I had the Bible, like a good writer would, I would have that and I could just flip through it and say, oh yes, but I didn't do it. And, listen to Mother, do it yourself, do it when you have the chance and don't have to go back and reread 17 books to get the answer.
So with your Joe Burgess series, you said that it was only supposed to be a quartet, but it ended up being umpteen books now. Was
Yeah.
it a fan or reader's request to have more of them, or did you when you finished that fourth one, was it your decision that we really need at least one more, if not a few more, to kind of continue his
It was
character?
kind of a joint thing. What happened was, I meant to write the 4 seasons. So Playing God is in the winter, and The Angel of Knowlton Park is in the summer, and then Redemption is in the fall, and then Grant You Peace is in the spring. And I loved that. I love the sort of the religiousness of the titles, and I love the sort of, the 4 seasons of Burgess's life, and I was done. And I was very happy with that. But when I was done with it, I missed them. And while I was missing them, other people were saying, when's the next Joe Burgess? When's the next Joe Burgess? We want more Joe. And I said, yes, but it's the 4 seasons. I said, and I've done the 4 seasons. And they said, oh, for heaven's sakes, this is New England. You've got tourist season. You've got black fly season. You've got mud season. You've got hunting season. We got lots of seasons, So I really, I don't think of them as being located in the seasons so much in the next set of books. Because A Child Shall Lead Them was summer. It happens to disrupts a 4th of July picnic. And then A World of Deceit is actually, a month later in August when Burgess goes on vacation. So that one of them I think of as tourist season, and the other I think of as I don't know what season it was yet. But anyway.
Which was the black fly season?
Yeah, that could have been the 4th of July, but I think we're a little past. It's hard to know. I think things are getting strange in New England these years. It used to rely on, there were no ticks when we were growing up. Yep. Now the ticks are just awful.
Yep. They were just talking about that on the news this evening, that last year, because of the drought here in New Hampshire anyways, it was a fairly low tick season, but we've had the amount of rain that we should now, and so they're all coming out. And I actually had one on my back the other day. Thankfully it was there only for a couple hours, but our dogs are always coming in with some on their feet and bellies and things like that. So you had mentioned, I don't remember who, but you were talking about annoying characters. Do you have any annoying characters that you either purposely wrote in to be annoying or accidentally wrote in and ended up being annoying?
In the Thea Kozak series, Thea's mother, who thinks that Andre is an unsuitable partner because he's a cop, who didn't want her daughter to be a professional because she wanted her to marry and produce grandchildren, and she doesn't see Thea for who she is. And I used to get a lot of mail from people saying, when are you going to kill off her mother? And I said, I don't believe in killing off mothers when it can be avoided. I'm hoping that her mother will grow and change. So we'll see. It's getting better. But Thea's also learned not to spend much time with her mother. So it's going to be complicated because in the book, A Death Comes Knocking, Thea is very pregnant. And she is going to have to, have a baby, and her mother is going to be involved in some way. And she's going to have to deal with childcare, which is going to be a nightmare, because I always used to think that James Lee Burke should get the Department of Social Services to take Alifair away because he was always parking her with strangers. And, I used to work for the Department of Human Services. I know that that's not an appropriate way to raise a child. So Thea's mother and Andre's boss, Joe's boss, one level up. His lieutenant is a great guy, but the captain above his lieutenant is one of those by the book jerks who, as Burgess says, has forgotten anything that he ever knew about policing. and in A Child Shall Lead Them, I think. Oh, no, it's not A Child Shall Lead Them. It's, oh dear. There's one that they changed the name of, and I don't like it, and now I can't remember what it is, but it's the fifth Burgess. You'd think I wrote it, I'd know. Led Astray, which is about someone targeting cops. The boss is targeted by the bad guys, and they rescue him. And forever after, a running theme through all the books is, why in hell did you guys do that, Burgess? You know, so there's always going to be somebody.
Were some of these people modeled or characters modeled after people that you talked to discuss, different procedures
No,
and things
it's
with, or
really,
they're just all just completely a modeled, made up?
the thing that's really funny is that I had written the first Joe Burgess before I went to Portland and met my friend Joe and started getting advice. So I'd already created him, but I got a lot of confirmation. People in Portland will tell you that these characters are based on people, but for the most part, they're people that I don't know.
Mhm.
So how could I, but that's all right. My sister used to say that she was in my books. And one of my friends had a sister who was a real kind of whiny, annoying human being, and she put her in all her books. And one day her sister said to her, Tony, when are you going to put me in a book? So they see themselves when they're not there, and they don't see themselves when they are. But I don't use real people. There's enough.
Yeah.
There's, imagination is what it's all about. Plus, they're all composites because we meet so many people
Right.
along the way. And you can just borrow a trait or a way they walk or a slight hunched shoulder or an eye twitch or a something or a habit of dressing. And that all just goes into,
Do you
creating
ever
the
meet?
potato head.
Well, I was gonna say, were you ever in a setting? So it'd be like walking down the street or sitting in a restaurant or something, and say, "Oh, I like his eyes," or "I like the way she walks," or something, and then kind of mold that into your
I
characters.
probably do that more unconsciously than consciously, but sometimes I do. Years ago, I was looking through a catalog and I found a character, a model, in this clothing catalog who I thought looked like my vision of Thea. And so I cut it out and I put it on my husband's desk, and he came home, doesn't like things on his desk, picked it up, said, what's this? I said, that's Thea. He said, no, it's not. She doesn't look anything like that. And that really is the beauty of fiction. People send me pictures of Burgess, but he just is who he is,
Mhm.
although we play the game sometimes of who should play Burgess in the movie.
Well, we'll get to that question. That's one of my fun questions at the end. So you can think about that one. Um, I was like, oh, so some of those some other characters there, like you're not gonna kill off the mother because you just don't kill off the mother. But are there other characters that you planned on ending their career in your series at some point, that became so beloved by your fans and your readers that they were upset about this, and even you were upset about having to do that because it's such a great character. Just the design of the character itself, the development of the character itself, you hated that, but at some point you're going to have to get rid of that character. And are there some that you just can't, you really didn't like the way you came up with the character, but they do have a part in subsequent books, so they got to keep coming up, and why can't I kill this character off?
I don't know. That's an interesting one. Actually, a more interesting version of that is that when I first wrote Thea, Andre was the guy who was gonna, be the cop who solved the first, she met and they sort of had to work together to solve her sister's murder. And then he was gonna kind of fade away because this is Thea's story. And I sent the second book to my editor and I got back this 9-page, critique about things she wanted me to do. And about every fifth line was pump up the Andre factor. And I thought, wait, this is not his book. This is not his story. And that was when I realized that when you are writing by yourself, it's just you and the page. But when readers become involved, there's kind of a triangle. There's you and the reader, there's the characters and the reader. And your readers get very attached to characters, and they were attached to Andre. So instead of dumping him as I had planned, Andre became the love interest, and and he's still there, and I'm very fond of him, but I just hadn't planned it to be that.
Right.
What's interesting too is that it's almost like knitting, where in one book there'll be a cast of characters, and we won't see them again for a while, and then they'll come back in like a different book. So in Death Comes Knocking, a couple of characters who were in one of the early books that Thea's very attached to, and they were with her when she tried to get married to Andre and it all went wrong. Suddenly they're back. They're sort of knocking on the door and saying, when this baby comes, we want to be the godparents. And I'm so happy to see them because they're really lovely. So I guess I'm more likely to bring back characters I like than I am to dump the characters that I don't like. Because, and I don't know, maybe that's a flaw in my character, but anyway, it's just how I am. I haven't been people, well, a good example of a character that I didn't like was years ago. I wrote a book that was it's the only book I've written that's multiple points of view. And it's what would now probably be called domestic suspense. It's a child who's kidnapped. And the points of view are the mother, the wife, the mother and the father, and the kidnapped child. So you get the different voices. I did not like the husband. I didn't like him at all. And so when I sent the book to my editor, and she said, I love the book, but you've got to make him more understandable. You've got to make him more likable. You've got to work on him so he's not so cardboard and one-dimensional. I didn't like him, but I worked really, really hard. And when a book was done, I felt as though I had shortchanged her at the expense of this guy that I really didn't like. That book is called Steal Away. And it's the only book I've written as Catherine Clark, as opposed to Kate Flora or Kate Clark Flora. But I was pleased. It was a wonderful, sort of relationship with the editor. It was the best editor I ever had. She sadly died before we could do a second book, but she really, really pushed me hard, and she was so wise. And that's what, one of those things that we learn is that you might not like what your editor has to say to you, but editors can make us so much better writers.
So you had mentioned it, and just kind of, so this will be sort of an off to the side. You mentioned that you wrote under Kate or a different name. You have a couple books that you wrote. You wrote as Catherine Clark, Thalia Filbert. Is that one of your other pen names?
Thalia Filbert is actually 5 of us. That was, talk about, every once in a while you need to just kind of go out and play. Mm-hmm. And so I had been in a blog group with a bunch of these people, and we had done a short story collection. And after the short story collection, we thought that was so much fun. Somebody suggested we should do a group novel. And so we did this, Beat, Slay, Love, which by Thalia Filbert, which is, those are both takeoffs on books we will not mention. And we just took turns writing chapters. We sort of knocked the idea around of what will this book be about? This is a book of a serial killer of famous TV chefs. And then we each took, pieces of it. And some of it, we had some people we had to rein in. It was so outrageous, but it was just the most fun. And you never knew what you were going to get when it came back around to you and it was your turn to write a chapter or two. So it was, this job has offered all of these little side adventures that I never expected. One of the little side adventures was a friend asked if I would submit a story to this collection, The Obama Inheritance, which was it took a lot of the conspiracy theories about the Obamas and during the Obama era and sort of tipped them on their ear. So that one was just, I wrote about Michelle Obama and a gang of vigilantes who, go after drug kingpins from American corporations, not from South America, who jack up the prices of children's drugs, critical children's drugs, and how they persuade people not to, and how they almost get caught. And she's the president's wife, and oh dear, and that was just super fun. And then a couple of years later, he, the same Three Rooms Press did this, The Faking of the President, which was taking real presidents' stories and giving them different twists. So I wrote about Huey Long almost not getting assassinated. I mean, there's fun things to do, and these opportunities wouldn't come along if you weren't able to say yes and weren't just there and know people.
Right. There was a book like that I read a long time ago, which I really enjoyed. So is that considered like speculative fiction or?
Which one?
Either of those.
These are just, I mean, I guess this could be speculative fiction. These are crazy stories.
Right.
And I wrote probably the most normal story in the group because not as adventurous as some, although it was really fun to be able to project voices and have the stuffed animals' heads on the wall start talking. So perhaps it's a little speculative. Yeah.
Well, the one that I had read is called Hitler Victorious. And it was about their short stories about if Hitler won the war, or there was one where somebody went back in time to kill Hitler, but ended up there was like when he was a baby, but then he had a twin, and the twin was the one that got taken away and whatever. There was another one where the United States was split in half. Japan had from like the Mississippi and West, and they were fighting Hitler and his army from the Mississippi and the East Coast, but there were pockets of Americans in there still trying to regain the United States. Wow. But yeah, that one, it was really good. Some of them were kind of boring, but so it was
no collection is going to be 100%. That's just the nature of collections, I think.
Do you ever think of doing side stories or side books for some of the other minor characters as something fun or something to do off?
I have vaguely thought about it, but I haven't done it. This 2 books a year plus somehow or other seems to be about all I can manage. Plus every once in a while there's a short story. I mean, I did a short for years, between when Thea was dropped and when I was trying to decide where to go, and I decided to go with Burgess. At the same time, I got invited by a couple of other authors to sort of do a project where we published crime stories by New England crime writers. We formed Level Best Books, and for about 7 years we did crime stories, and then we passed it on to Leslie Wheeler and another group, and then it went away to somebody else, and they're not doing our thing. But I understand that some of the people from the original project are revamping. So every year we wrote we published short stories, crime stories. And one of the requirements was that each of the editors also had to write a story. So I ended up with a bunch of stories. So a few years ago, I don't know if you can see this, I put them all together in a book, Careful What You Wish For. And it's described as stories of revenge, retribution, and the world made right. And and that was really fun, so. And that I did draw a lot on the sorts of things that I saw when I was doing, working in the Maine Attorney General's office. And battered women, battered dads, a lot of stuff. But it was really fun to actually have a book of my stories. I don't know if anybody's ever bought it or read it, but I did it.
Well, you have 3 short stories on your website.
The Christmas
A Christmas Story, Angel's Christmas Eve, Reform School of Christmas Stories. What about doing something like that with some of your more minor characters?
Well, actually, one of those started out as a novel, or at least I think it's going to be a novel, whatever it's embarrassing to say, I can't remember what this one was called. Might be Reform School, if that was this year's, where there's this sort of, tired old cop who's not Joe Burgess, but a different guy with a different background, and a kid who's obviously, sort of nobody's caring for him, and a waitress who's, lost and lonely, and it's Christmas and they're all going to come together. But I thought it would be really interesting to then take that on and make it a book. This I have, reams of things that I, want to make into books.
Well,
I
that
have
one there.
Some of these short stories. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
there was a short story, a couple of short stories about a woman who worked for the U.S. Marshals Service named Gracie. And Gracie is really tough and really rebellious and has a very hard time keeping her head down and acting like a good U.S. Marshal. And I had 3 or 4 of those, and I just really want to go on and just keep writing Gracie stories because I love them. But I got bogged down. So right now I'm in the middle of something where there was a shootout transporting a character to, I think, Seattle. And now she's on some island looking for somebody. And it's, and it's just, I don't know if it's a novel or whether it's just linked short stories or whether it's just this thing I do every once in a while when I'm between books.
So that reform school one, it says it was out in 2020. And I love this. Bill Carson was the original snot-faced kid, the kind of kid who had people mutter reform school, scrawny, dirty, ragged, and into mischief as if his life depended on it. That's kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so in your crime stories, how dark do you get? Because like we had mentioned, there's tons of different subgenres of subgenres, and some can get very dark, like the noir. Some can get real in the thrillers. They can get really. How dark do yours get? And have you ever had to sort of either rein yourself in as you're writing because no, I don't like that, I'm getting way too dark on this, or have some of your readers or fans said, you know what, that was really dark?
I think they're medium boiled for the most part. Actually, there is one, it's not that dark. It's just what's in people's minds, but it actually was inspired by Finding Amy, by sitting in the courtroom looking at the perpetrator, the bad guy's mother, clutching her Bible and protecting her son. And and that's dark. It's dark because the mother of the victim is sitting in the same courtroom as the mother of the perpetrator, the killer, and thinking about how much she wished something bad would happen to that woman's daughter who is in the courtroom so that she would know how it feels, and having all these dark thoughts until she realizes that this woman is so self-involved, so narcissistic, that it wouldn't have the impact. And then she feels terrible. And then the child has a seizure, and it's actually the victim's mother who takes care of the child. And it's one of those, of course, these thoughts must go through people's heads when they're sitting there in the courtroom. How could they not,
Right.
I mean, obviously life does occasionally spill over, but I don't base my characters on real people.
Right.
It's
What about the graphicness of it? So some of the the murder scenes and things like that, kind of medium, or have you ever had somebody say, oh, how about a little bit more blood next time, or a little bit more?
Nobody is ever going to say to me, how about that next time? Believe me. No, these are medium boiled. Burgess is hard. I mean, people sort of act shocked. I mean, the second Burgess, which is called The Angel of Knowlton Park, which is about the murder of a child, and it's terribly sad, opens with the cops arriving at this park on a very hot summer day and watching a fly land in the child's eye. I mean, it doesn't get much darker than that. But that's what they see. And it's really important to me to, to sort of make it feel authentic. I mean,
It kind of sounds like the Alienist, Caleb
Caleb Carr.
Carr, the Alienist. I haven't read the book, but there was a mini series about it, and yeah, I kind of had a hard time at the beginning because the first thing was this murdered child, and
I have a hard time with a lot of these things, and I have a hard time reading books where horrible things are done to women, and I hate it when women writers dismember their characters. And yet, sometimes it seems to me that the story is what the story is. And maybe I'm just making excuses, but that's how it feels to me. It feels like it is. And my job as a writer, to a great extent, is just to discover it.
Mhm. Were you ever do you ever have to, when you were writing a really heavy scene, or chapter, just halfway through, just no, I gotta stop. I gotta go out, take a walk, take a breather, go have a glass of wine, whatever. Just because it was just so heavy that that topic that you were writing at that particular time.
Probably. I mean, probably I have to do that a lot. I mean, a child shall lead them. You should read A Child Shall Lead Them. It's very sad and it's very hard. And then you'll see exactly what I do and why, but one of the things that I'm trying to do in a way is to show the impact that these things that they have to do have on, the cops, the investigators, the detectives, the people who have to come to the scene. Because most of us civilians just don't see that, don't get that, and so if people say, why are you writing so dark? I think I would probably say, because if you ask cops what they've seen, first of all, they probably won't talk to you, but if they do and they trust you, it's dark. I mean, and yet it can be so incredibly moving. One of the things that I found amazing, I'm sorry if we're going to go on all night here, but
Yeah, no, keep going.
when I was working on Finding Amy, I had to go and talk to the state police sergeant who was in charge of the state police side of the investigation. And he was very rigid and very cold and very upright. And, sort of, you are here and I'm there. And I had to, sort of develop a relationship where he felt he could trust me before he would really talk. And after a couple of hours, we're sitting there and I'm saying, well, what did it feel like the night that you were there digging up the body? And you don't ask cops what it feels like. And he was telling me about the lights and the colors and the people and the air and the smells and the whole darn thing. It was absolutely amazing. And it was so vivid because, it's Christmas and they're out in the woods and they put up all these lights and they're doing a forensic exhumation, which means that they're taking the body out, they're disclosing the body sort of bit by bit with brushes and sifting every piece of dirt. And there's a snowstorm coming and they have to take their time. It's just absolutely amazing. And so I guess I'm trying to convey a sense of some of that.
Right. When you talk to these people, like with the game warden, you said you had a recorder and then somebody else was taking notes. Is that what you do? Do you just use a recorder? Do you also write things down on a notepad?
I think I do both. I didn't used to use the recorder, but once I started doing a lot of things where I had to do a lot of interviews. I mean, when you're writing fiction, you just write fiction, except that we're writing crime fiction, which means that our readers are very sophisticated and they've seen a lot of TV shows that maybe get it wrong, like, CSI, but you're writing to a sophisticated audience. So often what I'm doing is writing and keeping a list of questions to go ask when I have a break to try and get it right.
Now, when you write, do you are you a plotter or a pantser? This is one of the.
I'm a cooker.
A cooker.
A cooker is that I take all the bits. You start with sort of who's the victim, why are they in this situation, why were they killed, how were they killed, why were they killed, who wanted them dead, and you sort of carry that all around. Excuse me, for a while until I have enough information about the story just from thinking about it to start writing. So it's not that I have a big outline, and it's not that I type chapter 1 and have absolutely no idea what I'm writing about. It's somewhere right in the middle. And I always joke that when I'm cooking, which is often a couple months process, I will be in the midst of doing something else, and all of a sudden an idea will hit me. And it could be at the grocery store when I'm reaching for the frozen peas. And I always say that, like, Paddington Bear has that little label that says, please look after this bear, thank you. And on the back it says, if found, please return to. Well, that's me. It says, please look after this author, thank you. Please, if found, return to. Make her put the peas back and just tell her to go home, because, I'm not in the grocery store anymore. I'm, thinking, oh no, that last scene that I wrote it's not right. It's not true to my character yet.
Your settings, are these set in for both your series? Are they set in? I don't remember if we talked about this yet or not, but in a real city or Are they made up towns, or are they really not mentioned?
Where Thea is not mentioned. Um, Joe is a cop in Portland, Maine. He has a house in Portland. I sometimes say to people, where do you think Joe's house is? I used to joke that the only things I knew how to find in Portland were the courthouse, the police station, and the library. And everybody laughs. But what's really fascinating is that I write something and people will say, oh, I know just where that is. But I might have made it up. But that's okay. Because
Yeah.
I've spent a fair amount of time riding around in police cars at night, up and down those streets and saying to the cop I'm riding with, tell me what you're seeing that I'm not going to see. And it's really interesting what I learn.
I love Portland. We used to go there quite often. At least once a year when our kids were little, we'd go to the State Theater and see the Nutcracker, and then we go down to DeMillo's and have dinner. They'd have their lobster and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah, we have family Christmas at DeMillo's every year. We have the family dinner. Yeah.
and of course, when it was used to be called the Cumberland County Civic Center, and whatever it's called now, friend and I used to go there for concerts all the times, and some of the other restaurants and stuff. But we never really spent a lot of time. Mostly those places, go to places to eat. But there's some great little hole in the wall bars and stuff down there. Of course, there's great independent bookstores up there as well. Um, so do you use real businesses, or were all the businesses names changed, but you could still get an idea of what the business was if you mentioned certain
I
streets?
basically make them up. I mean, they'll be sort of like some of the other places on the street, you know, which is the one that smells of beer and you really wouldn't want to use the ladies' room, and which is the one that, has everybody where everybody goes for breakfast, or that's open all night, or, and I do put Dunkin' Donuts in, but Dunkin' Donuts is so, it's everywhere.
Right.
No, there are things like that. And then I have the imaginary ones. I have the wonderful lady who every time Burgess comes through the door, she immediately makes him a meatloaf sandwich, And if he comes in and she's out of meatloaf, she's distraught. So, but it's made up, but that's okay. Because if it's things that people can relate to.
Right.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned when you're writing, you're actually writing things down. I'm assuming you use some sort of word processor or computer,
And
or
You're,
do you?
you're sitting on my laptop right now, Chris.
Yeah.
I started out, with let's see. When my second son was born, I bought a computer, and it was the kind that the program was stored on one disk and the work was stored on the other disk, and, in and out. He's about to turn 37. So I think that I've been using a computer for a long time. I'd like
Yeah.
to hand edit. I
Okay.
like to print it out and edit by hand. But sometimes, after a while, that got so expensive that I do some of my editing on screen
Mhm.
now.
And do you use one of those programs like Scrivener? Because you had mentioned that you, when you were trying to remember what the daughters' names were,
Yeah.
you looked it up. Do you?
I use yellow stickies. I have a program called Kate and the Yellow Sticky where I look it up and I write it on the yellow sticky and I put it on the wall. We just had the wall painted and all the yellow stickies came down, so I may never know anything again. All my passwords are on the wall. My characters' relationships are on the wall, and all the little editing symbols are on the wall.
Do you have little strings going to each one, like those big boards that you see on some of the police shows tying
No,
different
no,
things
I do
together?
not. I don't. I should, but I don't.
Now, your editing process, how many edits do you go through before you send it off to your
Depends
publishers?
on how close to deadline I am, right? Who's impatient on the other end to get that book done. But I believe, the statement that I make and I try to adhere to, but it's not perfect, is that story goes in the first two drafts and craft goes in on the next three. So,
Um, Go ahead.
that's it.
That's it. Now, how many editors do you go back and forth with the editor
Um,
a lot, or is it pretty much?
it almost entirely depends on the book. I have a very editorial agent And so an awful lot of the back and forth is with her or with one of her assistants, where they say, I think this is too harsh, or I think you need to do, X, or I think you need to develop this more. So she will get back to me and say, fix X and Y and Z. And and that's the way the world seems to be working much more now, is you either that there's much less editing at the publishing end, which is where we would have expected it, and much more editing either through your agent, through your beta readers, or through hiring an editor. And I've hired editors for various pieces along the way, because the agent or the editor at the publishers would be saying, I don't find the character sympathetic enough. So then I'll maybe go get a private editor and go through the whole book and see what they have to say about how I can make that character more likable, or how I can make the book, much faster paced. So, and most of us, or a lot of us, I think, are now hiring private editors. And I think that's wise, either developmental editor who helps you with the storytelling itself. And then, sometimes you look at a manuscript and say, there are 25 missing words here, and the names of towns are spelled wrong, and this is wrong. This is just me just doing a read for a quote, and I'm sending it back with a comment on almost every page. So, and maybe the editor will catch that in the final. But I've seen things that are supposed to be finals that are still not ready to go, and I'm a very picky reader. I'm horrible. If people were as mean to me as I am to them, I'd have far fewer friends. But I was very mean to Bruce. I was very mean to Bruce because I knew he could write a great book. And so when he sent me his first book and I said, the character is not you, and this guy's life is too nice, and he doesn't have enough problems, and it's all just sliding away, he dug in and he wrote a good book. And and he's been so sweet about giving me credit, because really what I was is mean.
Oh, when I was going through his website, as we were talking, and I had Douglas Preston, did a review, and that caught my eye. So I wanted to read that when I started introducing his books, and then I scrolled down a little bit more, and there was a review from you too. I'm like, hey, we're talking to her in a couple of days, so I made sure I brought that one up, and that's how I found out kind of a little bit from him, and I wanted to get a little bit from you. Have you ever butted heads with some of your editors who wanted? Did you ever win?
Yeah. I mean, I've lost, and that's been fine. And I've won. Actually, in Steal Away, the book I wrote as Catherine Clark with the wonderful editor, the couple had lost a baby to a genetic disease. And I wanted a genetic disease that would have the baby sort of waste away, but not be sick, just sort of fade away, just sort of be heartbreakingly drifting away. And so I found an expert, and I got the disease, and I described the baby's condition, and she didn't believe me. And she said, no, it can't be. It's just not plausible. And so I just sent her from the doctor, all the, things from medical journals. And, so maybe I toned it down a bit, but I had to hold the line on that because it seemed to me so critically important to my characters that they be brokenhearted, but that it be this kind of thing and not that, and that she could keep sort of saying kind of, in this distressed wonderment, he wasn't sick, but he was dying. I mean, it was just that thing. It meant a lot to the development of her character.
As you were going through your edits, did you ever have, and you mentioned beta readers, did you have, or do you have specific beta readers for the more technical aspects of your book, so that you can say, oh, you've written so many now that maybe you don't need those, but at least in the beginning, you got, from all your discussions and talks with police and other experts and stuff. So you write that into your book. Did you submit it back to them or to other readers specialize in those type of things to make sure the technical stuff is correct?
I do generally. I do that as I go along. But there's a rock and roll song. It might be Bob Seger, I'm not sure, where he says, "I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then." Because having written all this nonfiction with cops, having, spent hours and years in their lives and in their stories, um, I know when I'm doing it wrong. And sometimes I'm doing it wrong because we all have to, because if your character is involved in firing their gun, they're off the case and driving a desk. So I can't have my character in the middle of an investigation suddenly disappear from the investigation. But so there's things like that. There's a lot more rules and a lot more rigidity in the real world of policing than in my fictional world of policing.
Do you have a sign that says "Do not"? I can't read my writing. The sign that you had made for your.
Oh, no, the sign that says "Not now, I'm writing."
Yeah, right.
I don't need it. I've been doing this I was 10 years in the Unpublished Writers Corner, and I've been published for about 27 years. So I have discipline. I can sit down and write. I can get interrupted in mid-sentence and come back to it.
Okay.
I can do all those things because I've been doing it so long.
Mhm.
But I think that in the beginning, and knowing from my students, it is a really critical thing to believe that you have the right to carve out that time. And it is so hard to defend that, especially if you're not published, because you don't think you have any value. You don't think you have rights. You just have a dream, a passion, to defend your time, to defend your writing.
Have you ever been out with family or friends, or had them over for parties or dinners or whatever, and all of a sudden this huge idea comes, or something that you've been struggling with, finally the light bulb comes on, and you just say, "Everybody stop, get me a pen, get me a piece of paper, quick."
I have done something like that, which is I'll be driving and I will stop and go into a library and ask the librarian for a pen and a piece of paper to write it down. And now you can talk to your phone, which helps.
Right.
But Siri and I have a very, it's not a smooth relationship. When I say, Siri, take a note, and then I tell her something, she comes up with garbage. And the next day I'll be so excited. I'll, go and look at what she took down, and it's nothing like what I said. So, and then I'm getting older, so it's really hard to hold things in my head. So it's terribly unfair life,
Do you ever write things on like napkins if you're out at a
I
restaurant or
do.
something?
I have napkins with things written on them, sure.
Oh.
And lots of millions of little pieces of paper in, coat pockets in my purse and my pants. Before you put things in the wash, you have to make sure you haven't washed the great idea.
Yep. So your book covers, who designed your book cover? Obviously the publisher. How much input did you have on those?
Some of the publishers do it. Sometimes my publisher does it and I'm unhappy and get very cross. I do not like the book cover for A Child Shall Lead Them, which is the next to last Burgess. It's a little too sweet. And it's such a dark book. I love the book cover for, Careful What You Wish For, because I hired the designer myself and, made it look like what I wanted it to look like. But they're all over. I think the ones for the Faking of the President and the Obama Inheritance are noir hilarious. So, and years ago, when this is a diversion and a half, when she was in her 80s, my mother, who had always been a writer, but not a fiction writer, or she'd been working on a novel forever, went to the Vos Library in Union and complained that she didn't like the mysteries on offer because they either had people who were improbably rich and lived lifestyles she couldn't relate to, or they were so full of blood and gore that an older woman couldn't read them. And the librarian, who was a friend of hers, said, "Well, Mrs. Clark, if you're not happy with what the Vos Library has to offer, why don't you go home and write one?" So my mother went home and wrote The Maine Mulch Murder.
Oh.
And she published it when she was 83. And then she had a stroke and she died at 87. And when she died, she was working, she had a mystery that she'd written that needed editing. So as a gift to her, I finished her second book, The Corpse in the Compost, and published that, and had a cover made that looked like The Maine Mulch Murder. So
Nice. Nice.
it's always something.
Yep. So do you ever think of going indie so that you can have more freedom to do things like your title, your story, your edit, your
Some of
story?
the Burgesses are a semi-indie, you know, they're a publisher. They do the design work and stuff like that, but it's a collaboration. I actually would like to go back to a nice New York publisher so that I would not make any money, but somebody else would do the marketing and the promo. I'm awful at marketing. I mean, I'm just awful. I don't do enough. And I'm so tired of it. I mean, I feel like I've been doing the buy my book dance for 20 something years and my feet are tired. But I think that it's critical. And if I go completely indie, I mean, careful what you wish for is indie. You know, that was just me deciding to
Right.
put it together. Um, no, I'd really like a publisher who said, damn if she isn't a good writer, and let's put her on the bestseller list because she writes as well as the rest of those people. That's what I would like. But, you know, whatever happens, I'm not going to stop writing books. So, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
So it must have been difficult with the marketing over the past year plus, not being able to go to conventions. Did you do a lot of conventions and stuff before?
I used to. I did them for years. Well, I mean, look who's the woman who started two of them.
Right.
Yeah. So I used to. I don't know. I sometimes think about retirement. You know, it's expensive to go to these things. I did go a few years ago to something called the Writers Police Academy, which was absolutely dynamite. And if you want to write police procedurals, it's just the best conference to go to because it's full of cops. And you know, and you know, you learn so much. And another long-winded story, and then I should stop, right? So I went to the Writers Police Academy, and I hadn't signed up for, you know, all these things. I signed up for things, but the ride-alongs went away really fast. But somebody dropped out, and the guy who was running the conference was my friend, and he said, "You want to go on a ride-along?" And I said, "Sure." They lined up all the cops, and he said to me, "You can pick one first." And I picked this guy who looked like he had some experience. We had the single most boring evening in his patrol sector. Nothing was happening, absolutely nothing. And, but we were talking, and we were talking about, you know, we passed a guy walking along this country road, and he stopped and turned around and just went back and checked in with him, you know, where are you going and where did you come from? And thought that was a little odd. And so I said to him, why did you do that? And he pulled into a parking lot and he starts telling me the story of the shootout that he was in. And he showed me the video of the shootout on his computer in the car.
Huh.
And we talked about how he told us how they handled it after he'd been in the shootout. We talked about who the guy was and why he'd stopped at 4 o'clock in the morning, what he'd learned about the guy subsequently, which was that he had, you know, he looked like he was carrying like a little folder or a little book, but there was a gun in it. And when he went back to check the guy, his ID, turns out there was a federal warrant out for him. And when he got out of the car, the guy started shooting.
Oh,
And the guy was on his way down to the gas station to kill the attendants and steal all the money. And it turned out to be this simple question, why did you do that? Led to incredible insight. And then we went back to his station and talked to his superior and about that and what gets you through it and what's it like. And so, you know, I'm kind of like, I describe us writers as like pieces of blotting paper.
mhm,
You know, we just go through the world and absorb it all.
mhm.
And then you've got this amazing stuff to work with about the emotional and physical impacts on you and your family when suddenly out of the blue somebody pulls out a gun and is shooting at you.
Mhm. When you were at the conventions, either with a booth trying to, have your books get out there, or as an attendee, just walking around to see everybody, who was the most famous writer that just sort of blew you away, and I don't want to say fangirl, but pretty much, that you really got to know and talk with, and you got to talk about your book with them.
Well, I mean, I talked with Mike Connolly a lot at the earlier when I still went to conferences a lot. He's a lovely guy. Jeff Deaver, had dinner with Jeff Deaver. Really like Jeff Deaver. He's great. He's weird as can be, but he's so all about writing. I mean, and craft. And trying to think who else. Lee Child is really nice, but I don't really know him. listening to Sue Grafton was so sweet when I was a wide-eyed newbie, and sort of
Yeah, that's the one I'm kind of
kind of
referring
thing,
to is
she sort of let me show you the ropes. And then, there was when I was really, really new at it was at the conference where somebody said, go home and join Sisters in Crime, because that's where you're going to find your tribe. You're going to find your people, and people will help you, and they'll help you all along the way. And so that there's always someone wonderful.
Mhm.
I love the booksellers myself. I like to hang out in the book room. So, because you guys are what
Yeah.
we need. We depend on you so much, and you can make such a difference in a writer's life.
Oh, we appreciate that. Yeah, that is the one advantage that we have that Amazon can't do is talk to you, get to know you, and then we can really talk about your books to the customers when they're looking for particular things. You know, I give recommendations every day,
Ooh.
and it's as simple as, oh, I'm trying to find something for my mother. What does she like to read? A little bit of this, not really sure. What does she like to watch on TV? What kind of music does she listen to? What does she watch for movies? And from there, we can kind of, show them where to go. But you can't put that into an algorithm
No, you
and,
can't.
and
And I
get.
love it when Amazon, because I've been looking at my reviews, will say, recommend my books to me. You might like this book. I actually did like that book.
So final question, because we're a little bit over, but that's fine. Final question, and we touched on this way at the beginning. So publisher comes to you and says, or a movie or TV screenwriter comes to you and says, we want to put your whichever series on the big screen, small screen, mini series, something like that. Um, who would you like to? Well, let's start with Thea. Who would you like to portray Thea and some of the other main characters?
I haven't thought about it for quite a while, Chris, because I used to do this a lot, but I haven't done it in a while. And, I'm getting older and Thea's getting older. Um, so I don't know who would be a good, strong woman to play Thea. Thea's tall, Thea's dark. Um, Really, I think, the trouble is I'm not familiar enough. I don't watch much television, with the young actors and actresses. So it's hard to know. I should be able to answer this question in an elevator, but I'm drawing a real blank. And I can tell you the same is true for Joe, but I have a blog post from, I can go back and look at where I had all these pictures of people like, what should Viggo Mortensen play him? Should, oh dear, what's his name? The guy from Grosse Pointe Blank, John, damn. It's got to be somebody, it's got to be a bigger guy.
Uh-huh.
And it's got to be, sort of a hefty person. And that's so. No, I've cast all these things, and now I honestly can't tell you who I would have. But tomorrow I will ask my Facebook friends,
Well,
and
I
they'll
was
get
just
back to you, because they really do have, they will know more than I. But the thing about fiction, about writing, is it's the same reason I never liked music videos, and same thing as that story of my husband and the picture of Thea. We the readers get to create the character.
Mhm.
It's an act of our imagination. And so that's what makes it so much fun. And that's why when I think that Thea looks like X, somebody else will think she looks completely different. So I'll
Mhm.
email you after I ask my Facebook friends who should be playing my characters on TV.
I've had a couple of authors do that afterwards. They had their vision in their mind, or else they really didn't know, and they did exactly that. And one of them turned it into a contest too for like a free ebook or a free book or something
Yeah.
like that. I don't remember how it went, but maybe a marketing idea for you.
Yeah, I think Brian Dennehy is the kind of guy who is sort of Burgess-like.
Okay.
But didn't he just die? I can't keep track of who
I think
does what.
so. Yeah, I know. Um, so I guess one more final question. Any idea on ebooks or not ebooks, audiobooks for any of
Yeah,
yours?
I have a friend who has been a friend, a lovely guy named Dale Phillips, who has sort of been on my case for years to do audiobooks. Their audiobooks are the first two Burgesses, but they're a small company that just never does anything. And Brilliance Audio did Steal Away, which, was thrilling. But I just have to go and do it. And I haven't done it yet. And, you know, every day I say, please couldn't somebody send me an assistant who loves this stuff, you know, because I like to write books, but I'm going to do it because Dale says it's actually doable and everybody else has done it. And I just, you know, it's got to be the right voice.
Right, right.
And
Well,
so,
Dale was actually on at the beginning of our interview, and he's a great friend of the store. He's really been promoting us a lot, along with the other stores up in Maine and down in Massachusetts and stuff. He's a real proponent for indie bookstores. But something to keep in mind though for the audiobooks is Libro FM. They're an audiobook company that
spell that?
Libro Libro.fm.
Mm-hmm.
We have a link to them, kind of like bookshop.org. We have a link to them, and we get a portion of sales. So anybody buys a membership through an audiobook membership or just an a la carte audiobook, we get a portion of sales. They have specials all the time, and you can gift books to other people. You know, so that it's a great program. It's, you know, obviously a competitor to that other company that shall not be named, and
Yes.
so something to look into, anyways.
Oh.
Yep.
Dale is it sort of exemplifies everything that's best about our business. He's so generous and kind and, you know, and enthusiastic and, you know, helpful. It's nice.
Yep.
It's really,
Well, Kate, we're going to end it there, but I would like to say thank you again very much for being a part of us. Kate's books are available right now through bookshop.org. Again, go through our link to them, and you'll help support our store by purchasing us through that, or call us directly and we can order them. You can probably get them from Kate as well, or if you're not from around this area, please go to your local independent bookstore. If they don't have them, they will get it for you.
right.
Kate, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
And we hope to have you stop by in store someday.
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay.
And thanks everybody for on Zoom and over here on Facebook Live. And everybody have a good night.
Thank you.